Hello and Jai Jinendra to everyone. Welcome to today's session, Reimagining Jain Monasticism, the vows, duties, and the services of Śvetāmbara Jain Yatis from circa 18th century to present. And let us start the session with the recitation. And on that sacred note, let me describe very briefly about the session. As the title suggests, this talk is about Yatis, semi-renunciant monks, as Eric describes them, and their development, role, and influence in shaping the historical Śvetāmbar Murti Pujak Jain tradition. And this talk will also examine the biography of Upadhyay Yati Ramlal ji, who happens to be a prominent Khartar Gachayati Vaidya operating in early 20th century. And combining this historical case study with the author's fieldwork, the talk will demonstrate how Yatis use their medical expertise to serve their respective communities. And before we begin the session, let me read a very brief introduction of our speaker today, that is Eric Daniel Villalobos. Eric Daniel Villalobos is currently pursuing his PhD from the University of Division of Religion from Emory University in Atlanta, Gregoria. He completed his MA in South Asian Studies from SOAS University of London and submitted his dissertation titled The Benefits of Bending the Roots, the Social Functions of Yatis in Murti Pujak Śvetāmbar Jainism. He completed his BA in Religious Study from the University of California. And apart from this, he has also completed independent studies on a number of subjects related to Jainism, such as the study of Jain Salaka Purusa cycle. Eric is also the founder of UC Santa Barbara Religious Studies Club, which provided platform for religious studies majors to meet, present, research, and socialize. He has served as the president, interfaith manager, and reader of this club. He is also independently researching on Yati lineages. His work titled Yatis in Contemporary Murti Pujak Śvetāmbara tradition was published in the 16th issue of newsletter of Center of Jaina Studies. Eric has delivered a number of presentations based on his study and research in conferences and is here today with us to deliver a presentation, Reimagining Jain Monasticism, the vows, duties, and services of Śvetāmbara Jain Yatis. So welcome, Eric, and we are all very excited to hear from you. So without delaying, I would now like to invite Eric to please start the session.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'll just get right into it and share my screen. Okay. 1 second. Present. Okay. Can you just let me know if it's working? Can you see that?
Yes, it is visible.
Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, yeah. So once again, thank you for inviting me. Thank you everyone for coming to this presentation. Thank you to Saurabh and the rest of the Ancient Jainism group for inviting me and giving me a platform to share my research. I hope it's informative and insightful and that it sparks some good discussion. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So this presentation is divided into 2 sections, the first of which goes over the question of the vows of a Yati and whether Yatis as Śvetāmbar monks take all 5 great vows or Mahavrats. And the second takes this discussion and examines the life story of a prominent Jain Yati, Upadhyay Ramlal Gani, who is a prodigious Ayurvedic physician, and you can see him here. After that, I'll briefly contextualize Yati Ramlal's medical training with some examples from my fieldwork. And before getting ahead of myself, I should probably answer, for those who don't know, the basic question, who are the Yatis? So in a certain sense, that's the central question of this section of the presentation. But roughly, we can say that Yatis are a certain class of monks within North Indian Murti Pujak Śvetāmbar Jainism that developed an interpretation of Jain monastic conduct, which allows them to make practical exceptions to monastic rules in order to provide services to their communities. Yatis dominated Śvetāmbar Jainism from around the 18th to 20th century. during which time the monastic structure of Yati lineages looked fairly similar to the ones that most people may be familiar with an acharya called the Sri Puja leading networks of hundreds of Yatis that sometimes span the entire subcontinent while sitting on a gadi or a throne. Their conduct and even their dress and hairstyles differed in a number of ways from what people nowadays might think of as Samvegi sadhus. So most prominently, Yatis were known to travel by vehicle, which allowed them to maintain connections with very often mobile Jain merchant communities. They were also able to handle money, financial assets, and other material possessions. The other aspect that they're known for is their willingness to engage in, I hope it loads here, in esoteric arts and sciences like mantra shastra, Jyotish shastra or astrology, tantra, and Ayurveda, which will be the focus of the second part of this presentation. So nowadays, there are very few Yatis left. In the early 19th century, reformers like Acharya Atmaram intensified their campaign against the perceived lax practices of the Sri Pujas and Yatis, according to them. And over the following century, revived, strengthened, or established new lineages of what are called Samvegi sadhus, or the monks which dominate Śvetāmbar Jainism today, who follow a stricter, more literal interpretation of their monastic vows and secondary conduct. So we'll talk a lot about this. So moving forward, I'm going to use this term Samvegi to distinguish against Yati monks, although we will see that the terms are actually a bit more slippery than it might appear at first. So the term Yati was historically interchangeable with a variety of other terms denoting a renouncer, sadhu, muni, nirgranta, etc. Essentially, it just refers to a monk. This makes identifying Yatis more challenging in earlier sources. However, eventually the term took on the connotation of a special and, in the perspective of reformist Jains, like Acharya Atmaram here, of a lax renouncer. And because of the total domination of reformist Samvegi Jain monasticism, Western and Indian scholars have basically unquestioningly taken this perspective. Scholars have used a variety of descriptors in this line of thought in the brief instances where they have dealt with the figure of the Yati. Peter Flugel describes them as sedentary ascetics who fulfill ritual and administrative duties, but who make no pledge to fulfill the Mahavrats. John Court also calls them sedentary and uses the term domesticated. Elsewhere, he calls Yatis landed monks who took lesser vows. Paul Dundas uses the term non-initiated in his definition and says that their non-mendicancy makes them scarcely comparable to, quote, fully initiated monks. Now, Dundas' former designation might imply that Yatis do not take diksha or initiation, but this is not the case. Colonial sources like Walker in 1820, Burgess in 1884, and Campbell in 1901 all describe Yati and Sri Puja diksha ceremonies. An initiate is carried out of town in a procession to a circle of Yatis beneath a tree. His hair is pulled out. He's anointed with various substances. He is placed before his guru, and a mantra is whispered into his ear, and he's given the articles of a Śvetāmbar ascetic. Flash forward to today, and Yati Dikshas were still planned to take place in 2020 in both the Katargach and the Tapagach, though they were postponed due to COVID-19. So that Yatis take initiation is clear, it's obvious, but this begs the question, which vows do Yatis actually take during a Yati Diksha? Looking at other alleged semi-renouncers, and I've used this term semi-renouncers in the past, but we'll see that it's not entirely accurate. So looking at other alleged semi-renouncers in different Jain sects, we can frame this question another way. Are Yatis and Sri Pujas like Digambar Bhattarakas, who took the 5 great vows but have altered their interpretation of their vows and other monastic rules over time? Or are they perhaps more like the Terapanthi Samanis, who are an intentionally created class of nuns, and there's a few male Samans as well, who take special middle vows that give them monastic status, which also allow them to travel to promote Preksha meditation. Now, there are a number of ways to answer this question, but given the advanced age of most of the few remaining Yatis, I've prioritized interviews. And so what follows are my results. So I interviewed a number of mendicants during the 2021 Chaturmas months in Mumbai, Gujarat, and Rajasthan. I'm going to keep my respondents anonymous because these questions are directly related to monastic legitimacy and sectarian debate. But generally, these included some Sambhegi monks of various ranks from the Tapa and Anshulgach, as well as a number of self-identified Yatis from the Tapa and Katargach. What was immediately obvious was that there was some confusion and definitely no consensus over whether Yatis took all 5 vows in Mahavrat, Anuvrat, or some other form. Nor was there agreement over who alive today qualified as a Yati or the number of living Yatis. Estimates range between 2 and 200. Generally, older Sambhegis tended to more consistently say that Yatis took the 5 Mahavrats but did not follow them, while the younger Sambhegis gave different answers. Most, but not all, of the Yatis I interviewed insisted that they took all 5 Mahavrats, if they gave an answer at all. One Tapagach Sambhegi, introduced to me as a great scholar, said that Yatis historically took the 5 Mahavrats but did not follow them correctly, of course, in his perspective. But nowadays, there are Yatis, or so-called Yatis, who are initiated with as little as a single Mahavrat. He insisted that these were not real Yatis. And in fact, many of the Yatis that I interviewed were also quick to point their finger toward other self-identified Yatis and claim, usually on the basis of lineage or on conduct, that they were not, quote, real Yatis. These differing accounts suggest that the definition of the term Yati shifted and split over time. And moreover, that nowadays, the term is very much contested. Based on these accounts, I will now attempt to outline this shift in definition and highlight which groups accept which definitions. So it is universally accepted by all groups that the term Yati was originally interchangeable with sadhu and other terms denoting a monk in the Jain canon. We can therefore take Yati as sadhu, or Yati as just a monk, as our first definition. Tentatively, we can say that this is the definition used throughout most of Jain history to denote various types of monks with various interpretations of monastic conduct. At a certain point, monks within different gachas split from the dominant lineages as part of the Sambhegi reform movement. It is likely at this point that the term Yati gets a denigrated definition. It seems that it is the Sambhegis who give this definition against which they are attempting to distinguish themselves. Whether Yatis historically viewed themselves as breaking monastic discipline is a different question. But there seems to be a near universal agreement now that there were historical Yatis associated with either a different interpretation of monastic conduct or outright lax conduct or shitilta, according to the Sambhegis, especially travel by vehicle, the use of money, and the keeping of property, etc., and the practice of esoteric sciences like Ayurveda, astrology, and Mantra Shastra. Now, what may shed some light on this matter is the definition of Yatis given by Sri Puja Jin Chandra Suri of the Katargach. Sri Puja Jin Chandra's lineage is the last unbroken lineage of Sri Pujas in any gacha. Sri Puja Jin Chandra claims direct lineal descent from the 4th Katargach Dada Guru Jin Chandra, from whom he takes his name, and this is corroborated even by some Vedic writers like Vinay Sagar. Where they diverge, however, is that Sri Puja Jin Chandra holds that there is still no distinction between the monks in ancient history, who others agree could interchangeably be called sadhus or yatis, and the yatis in his lineage today. According to the Sri Puja, there is no break in his lineage or in the types of monks therein. All monks, from the first Tirthankar Rishabh's monks to his disciples today, were yatis. According to him, it is the Sambhegi sadhus, at least in the Katargach, who are the deviant group because they have no basis in this lineal succession. Now, the fact that Sri Puja Jin Chandra's lineage is directly descended from the Katargach Dada Gurus is uncontested, even as I said in some Vedic sources like Vinay Sagar. Some Vegis claim, however, that the Sri Puja Parampara started with Jin Labsuri. Now, the tricky part comes from the term Sri Puja itself. It simply means something like venerable one. And acharyas long before Jin Labsuri were often referred to by the term Sri Puja, which you can find in Katargach sources like the Katargach Brihad Guruvavali. I'll also add that Yatis after this time period kept being called Sambhegi by their followers because it's also a monastic epithet. So at this point, it becomes a matter of interpretation whether you retroactively look back and say, yes, this acharya's conduct was lax, as Sambhegis would claim. Therefore, they are a special thing called a Sri Puja. Now, on the issue of conduct, the Sri Puja does not accept that his lineage could ever be described as shitil or lax. According to him and his followers I interviewed in Bikaner, what is perceived by some Begis to be a breaching conduct actually represents the accumulated alterations of secondary rules throughout centuries of changing historical contexts. One follower gave the example of travel by vehicle. In ancient times, he said, travel by vehicle required the burdening of a beast or a human, but this is no longer the case with mechanized travel. This follower pointed out that many allegedly orthoprax Sambegi monks actually control large amounts of property, which are driven along behind them by followers as they walk on the road. The vehicles are driven so slowly that an enormous amount of fuel is wasted. Where's the logic in this? Just take the train, he said. As for the practice of esoteric sciences within the Sri Puja's lineage, which includes many prominent astrologers and Ayurvedic practitioners, these are considered seva, or service, necessary to maintain the strength of the Sangha. In light of his commitment to seva, the Sri Puja has established an Ashodhalaya, or an Ayurvedic medical dispensary, on his campus in Nal, near Bikaner, as well as a primary school which educates local school children at a low cost. The Sri Puja noted to me that this was once the norm in every upashraya or monastery, and that has now changed with the disappearance of Yati lineages, which we'll confirm shortly. Now, this is not to say that the breach of conduct, that any breach of conduct within his lineage is excused as a reinterpretation of monastic rules, however. The Sri Puja strictly maintains that all Yatis must be celibate, and that a breach of this vow means that a person has ceased to be a Yati. The Sri Puja maintains that all Yatis in his lineage follow strict conduct based on the 10 Yati dharmas. Some Begis also follow the 10 Yati dharmas, though the term Yati here would be taken to mean the original definition interchangeable with sadhu. They, moreover, would probably not accept that these Yatis are following the Yati dharmas in their view. In this sense, the Sri Puja is putting forth a competing orthodoxy with his Samvegi counterparts, one which also challenges the presumption of Western and Indian scholars alike about the strictures of Yati monastic discipline. It is also on this basis that he excludes every single monk other than himself and his disciple Yati Amrit Sundar from being considered a, quote, real Yati. This is on the basis of both their lack of lineal descent and their conduct, because no other supposed Yatis follow his monastic strictures, usually because they take a family. The Sri Puja's definition is obviously limited to the context of a Katargach, but it does carry some weight because the Sri Puja's lineage is the only one of any Gach that has retained its structure, that has maintained a significant following comprised of Yati families comprised of families historically tied to the lineage. And it is the only one which still controls a portion of the upashrayas and libraries which were historically under its control. Now, on this basis, we can add our next definition, that a Yati is no more than a proper monk, one who follows the 10 Yati dharmas, but did not join the Samvegi movement, and therefore recognizes the accumulated changes in secondary, currently limited to the singular Katargach lineage of Jinchandra. But one can speculate that this may have been how some other Yati lineages viewed themselves. Now, most of the renouncers and laity with I spoke did not have such a developed nor such a strict definition for Yati, and there is a wider acceptance, thanks to this domination of the reform movement, of the association with Yatis and Jatilka. When a Yati, a layperson, or a Samvegi with whom I spoke pointed to a self-identified Yati and claimed that they were not real Yatis, they often did so not on the basis of conduct, but strictly on the fact that they did not take Diksha from a Sri Puja or another Yati. This is the most common definition used by Jains today when referring to living Yatis. A Yati is someone who has taken Diksha from another Yati. This definition is not limited by conduct, but it is still quite limited. There are only about a dozen Yatis who meet this criteria, with varying interpretations of monastic conduct. Among the Yatis of this definition with which I interviewed, most either did not answer when I asked how many vows they took, or they insisted that they took all 5 Mahavrats. One Yati said that Yatis take all 5 Mahavrats in a Diksha ceremony. This is identical to the ones which sadhus take. But afterwards, their Yati guru takes them aside at night and gives them permission to relax the 1st and the 5th vows in order to do their work. That's ahimsa and aparigraha. Here, the formal initiation practice involves the 5 Mahavratas, which are amended later. Now, when I asked Yati Kumar Vijay, a prominent astrologer in Jodhpur, if he had any plans to initiate any new Yatis, he told me that there were 3 older men in villages surrounding Jodhpur who expressed interest, but he lost communication with them when he became sick with COVID-19. I asked about the preparations they would have to take should they move forward in becoming Yatis, and he said he would first have to educate them in the shlokas and then how to conduct pujas before he could initiate them. I asked if he would train them in astrology, his specialty, and he said that skills in esoteric sciences come after education and the formal taking of Diksha. If someone sees my Yatis wearing white robes and carrying the yoga, then they cannot answer religious questions. How can they say that they are really monks? He replied. As with Sri Puja Jinchandra's definition, Kumar Vijay's answer pushes back against the emphasis scholars have made about a Yati's practice of esoteric sciences versus his commitment to religious principles. In fact, the two can be seen to coexist. Kumar Vijay is famous for his astrology, but prioritizes religious teaching for entry into Yati monastic life. Now, most of the Tapagach Yatis alive today of this type took Diksha from Sri Puja Jaidev Himata. Adding to the complexity of these definitions, however, is that most of the Katargach Yatis and one Anchalgach Yati took Diksha from Sri Puja Jinchandra. And even though many of these Yatis consider Sri Puja Jinchandra to be their gurus, Sri Puja Jinchandra does not consider them to be Yatis or within his lineage because of their lax conduct. He has, however, given 2 Yatis of this type, Sushil Kumar and Lalit, permission to sit on his gadi at the Chintamani Parshvanath temple in Mumbai and perform mantric medical services. Now, the next type of Yati consists primarily of former Samvegi sadhus who were found to be lax or who wished to leave the monastic life, or were lay people who wished to become monks but wanted to be some of the freedoms which are associated with being a Yati, usually the freedom to travel at will or the freedom to stay in one place. In all of these cases, these Yatis took some sort of Yati Diksha from a Samvegi guru. The exact contents of these Yati Dikshas is not clear, nor does there seem to be a uniformity to them. It seems that these Dikshas are simply a way for Samvegis to bring new members or to retain older members into monastic life without having to fully commit to monastic discipline, but within categories which are familiar to them. To Samvegis, Yatis are simply lax monastics. Therefore, their own lax monastics must be categorized as Yatis. These Dikshas are incredibly controversial, and in many cases, especially in the Tapagach, they've attempted to ban them. And most people with which I spoke did not accept that these were real Yatis, despite many of these monastics using the term Yati in their own titles. Now, right. So the next consists. So finally, the term Yati has been taken up by the descendants of non-celibate Yati as a clan or gotra name. Now, one complication among these gotras is that celibate Yatis in many lineages formally adopted their disciples, who then went on to become non-celibate Yatis. When asked about these lineages, descendants of these Yatis would often refer to their predecessors interchangeably as guru or father. A leader of a Yati Gotra youth group told me that this practice likely began over concerns that the British government would seize monastic property. This practice blurs the line between a mendicant and a householder and a monastic and family lineage, and sometimes makes it nearly impossible to ascertain which Yati took Diksha. The possessions of Yati mendicants in these lineages, sometimes including control of their gadis, were then passed on to their disciples' children. Some have taken a position on their predecessors' gadi despite not having taken Diksha, and many maintain the roles which their predecessors once took, especially as astrologers, Ayurvedic doctors, and ritual specialists. No one directly said that these descendants are mendicant Yatis, but many of these non-initiated descendants, especially those who had taken on these roles, were included by several respondents in the number of Yatis which are currently alive. So this completes the list of various definitions of the term Yati as it is used today among Murti Pujak Śvetāmbar Jains as gathered from oral accounts. And I want to emphasize that I'm just laying out how the term is used by different people. The term is contested, and these categories are based on my observation of the uses. of the uses of the term as they were explained to me by a variety of lay scholars, Yatis, their descendants, and Samvegi sadhus. One would be unlikely to find a Jain who accepted more than a few of these definitions at a time. While Yati could refer to the ancient Jain renouncers who were interchangeably called a number of monastic designations, historically, the definition of the term shifted to refer to renouncers who were associated with either lax or reinterpreted monastic conduct and esoteric sciences. Those who call themselves Yatis today might come from the monastic lineage of another Yati, or from a Samvegi sadhu, or from the biological lineage of their Yati ancestors. One can expect that an examination of textual accounts might uncover more variations of the term, based on other configurations of lineal descent and monastic conduct, which would likely vary by time, region, and sectarian affiliation. Hypothetically, if someone were to find a ritual manual on Diksha, which prescribed less than 5 Mahavrats for Yatis, this would force us to re-examine the term once again. So now I'd like to move on to the second portion of this presentation and really zoom in on the life of one particular prominent Yati from the Katargach, Upadhyay Ramlal Gani. So Yati Ramlal, also known as Redisar, was born in Murshidabad in West Bengal in a town on the Ganges called Jihaganj, which was actually a hotbed of Yati activity due to the large Marwari Jain population that migrated to the area in the 18th century. His father, Saraswat Gokul Chandra, worked in Ranpur, while his mother, Vasanti, worked at a local hospital. After his father became ill, he took a train to go see him, and on that train, he met a 60-year-old Yati named Param Puja Sri Sadhu Ji Maharaj Danrup Ji Yati. So he followed this Yati Danrup to Bikaner, where he trained him to be a Jain Yati. Since then, Yati Ramlal has made significant contributions to Jain devotional practice, composing, compiling, and publishing eulogies to the Jain monastics of the past, as in the Guru Gun Ratnavali, and to genealogy of Jain clans, as in his Mahajan Vamsh Muktavali. But in addition to this legacy, Yati Ramlal was also especially known in his time as a prodigious Vaidya, or Ayurvedic physician. He and his disciples ran an Aushadhalaya, or Ayurvedic medicines dispensary in Bikaner. His expansive medical training in a number of alternative medical systems cultivated in the publishing of his 1904 Vaidya Deepak, a compendium of medical treatments, including from Angreji, or English medicine, and homeopathy. Before this long compendium of treatment begins, however, he offers a short 21-page biography and foreword, which delves into his medical training and thoughts on the current state of the medical system in North India. The rest of this presentation will be on some key points gleaned from his biography, along with some data from my fieldwork that will hopefully help to contextualize this material. So at the outset of his biography, Ramlal offers a description of the emergence of Ayurveda, which he ties to the Jain cosmogonic narrative itself, the story of Rishabh, the first Tirthankar. Now, the typical version of this story has Rishabh established structure of society as we know it today, as a transition from a previous time when humans could live off of wish-fulfilling trees. Now, Rishabh must teach the people crafts, arts, sciences, and trades, which is Brahmi and Sundari, writing and mathematics, respectively. In this sense, Rishabh is not only the first Tirthankar, but the founder of worldly knowledge in various forms. He teaches his eldest son, Bharat, the 72 arts, which includes medicine. And Bharat, in turn, teaches them to his 99 brothers. Now, Ramlal's version elaborates on this story and gives more detail about Rishabh and Bharat's founding of Ayurveda as a science. While in a Samvatsaran, where a Tirthankar preaches in the 4 directions to all gathered living beings, he gathers from the jungle numerous roots, herbs, minerals, metals, sub-earthen metals, and chemicals to cure diseases, and teaches it to his children. He establishes the science of Ayurveda by composing the Rishabh and Brahma Samhitas, which contain the 8 branches and sub-branches of Ayurveda, thereby benefiting human beings into 3 times, the past, the present, and the future. Now, upon his renunciation, Rishabh passes the throne onto Bharat, who becomes a Chakravartin, or universal emperor. As such, Bharat, and this is standard, writes the Vedas and establishes Brahminical lineages and teaches the Vedas to the Brahmins. After many years, he notices a trend of the consumption of meat and alcohol and explains to them the benefits and detriments of doing so, a form of knowledge called Asuri Chikitsa, the treatment of the Asuras. He explains that there are 3 forms of medicine: Asuri, Daivi, God medicine, and Manushi, human medicine. Daivi medicine, he says, consists of the gems, minerals, metals, and chemicals that can be mixed with herbs and other foods for medicinal purposes. He says that this class of medicine often gives the appearance of making the body better in humans, but can internally sometimes be quite harmful. So as he begins to speak about Manushi Chikitsa, human medicine, Ramlal diverges into a discussion about the contemporary state of medical practice. He explains that for medicine to be effective, it takes a combination of a proper diet, the willpower of the patient, and effective medicine. European medicine, he says, is good medicine, but only works for people in cold countries. This appears to be the start of an expression of anxiety with the introduction of allopathic medicine to North India. Ramlal continues that every year, London-based industrialists produce medicines in Europe and make about 12 crores of rupees. That's about 120 million rupees in 1904 by Ramlal's estimates, by selling them in India. Indian industrialists too go abroad and become wealthy dealing in medicines. And because of this, the social structure of medical practitioners was being overturned. Ramlal says that foreign and English educated Vaidyas have become like another caste among doctors, and the illiterate people believe this. Even the quacks and the pundits are of the same mindset on this. He then goes on to describe the sorry state of the field with uneducated, unpad yogis and foolish muktapun Vaidyas or physicians. The fool creates treatments for incurable diseases and goes to the house of a dying person with sweet medicine. And even though the person inevitably dies, they charge the full price. A learned Vaidya, Ramlal says, from love and passion, might take the cost of the medicines he produces and a fee, and oftentimes drops his fee altogether. A foolish Vaidya gives bad medicine. From sheer willpower, the patient survives. Like a blind man throwing a stone will inevitably hit something. In many cases, the foolish Vaidya will give bad medicine, which makes the disease grow worse, and is forced to run to a learned Vaidya to try and salvage the patient's health. Sometimes a Vaidya might benefit from the preference of the people to consult a Desi doctor. So they take a fee of 2 rupees and give the patient medicine from an apparently discounted government dispensary. Because of the dangers and uncertainty of relying on potentially uneducated medical practitioners, quacks, and the like, Ramlal wrote this Vaidya Deepak, the lamp of medicine, which dispels the darkness of ignorance and gives the reader the know-how of a learned Vaidya when one is not around, and allows one to protect themselves, their family, and their community. While the overall situation seems unfortunate, it did lead him to compile this treatise, and more importantly, outline his years of training under different teachers to establish his credibility, which can be very valuable for us. His general outlook is one of collaboration and a view that all people, regardless of tradition, want health for themselves and for their families. His final note is that within the Jain tradition, there are some Vegi sadhus, Yatis, Dundyas, which are early Stanaklasis, Theropantis, Digambar Pandits, and Bhattarakas. He doesn't mention naked munis. And even among the followers of Shiva and Vishnu, they are a bit deeper into Ramlal's medical training. We last left off in Bikaner, where he was studying under Param Puja Sri Danrup Yati. In Bikaner, he gets a bit of Jain religious training, but he mostly mentions that he learns worldly crafts like bookmaking, pleating, painting, and sewing. From his teachers in Bikaner, he also learns miraculous or chamatkarik tantra as well. He is called by Sri Puja Hansasuri, and in his upashray learns art, language, music, and poetry. And from a Yati Moti Chandramuni, he's given training in all the Jain sutras, as well as in the genealogy of Jain clans. On the order of the Sri Puja, Danrup Yati's son travels to Mumbai to the Chintamani Parshvanath Terasar, which still has Yatis in it, as we have seen, where he's taught the Jain Pratikraman Vidhi Mandal and the Vidhis of many pujas. After stopping in Pune to study more sutras, he travels to Hyderabad, to Begum Bazar, where he learns Unani medical practices. And also meets a deceitful alchemist who takes 4 or 5 rupees for impure mercury. He witnessed 4 or 5 men take this quicksilver, which inflamed their gums, Upon realizing they've been cheated, they tossed the mercury away, but some suffered very painful deaths. And from this experience, Ramlal takes some time to study alchemy while he is there. So he returns to Mumbai to study under Yati Manakchand, who teaches him empirical medicine and how to make a series of medical concoctions mixing butter, English chemicals, and other substances. He also learns from this Yati beneficial Jain mantras, miraculous tantra, and specifically names the Vijay Pataka yantra, as seen here from a Lonka Gach Gadi. He returns to Bikaner to see the puja pad of the new Sri Puja, and while there, he learns about ointments, laxatives, and herbal remedies. Herbal remedies. He learns this from a Yati Rupchand, who in turn learned it from a layperson from Valapur, who in turn learned it from a Lonka Gach Yati named Yati Fulchand. He eventually travels to Nagpur, where the local Rajvaidya, or royal physician, was a Jain Yati, who is also apparently very generous and kind, and who takes him to Sri Puja Chandrasuri of the Bhav Harsya Shaka, that's another branch of the Kathakach, who gives him access to his library. He studies under the library Pandit Juharmalji, probably also Yati, who gives him more training in the sutras. The Jambudvip Sutra is specifically mentioned. He also teaches him caveats of the Jain religion, as well as some life-saving mantras. He specifically mentions that studying here in the library of the Bhav Harsya Shaka Sri Puja, his peers include a Katragach Yati Rajshanji, a Rajvaidya, a royal physician, and it's unclear if they're a Jain, a Maharashtrian Brahmin, and a Muslim Hakim, a practitioner of Unani medicine. He's then invited back to Hyderabad to give lectures, where he becomes acquainted with some clerks from the court, who arranged for a layperson, Lunia Gajamal from Ajmer, to give him further training as a Jain Vaidya. This layperson taught him the secrets of Jain scriptures, medical secrets, how to counter sorcery, and many Unani recipes he learned from Muslim Hakims. He was also taught Maharashtra Prakrit, Sanskrit, and Pil Shastra here. Much later in Hyderabad, he also learns about the purification of mercury and 100 yantras and mantras that erase diseases, including the Ravana Pataka and the Surya Pataka. Most of the remaining biography covers his many pilgrimages and the study of Jain scriptures, so we can leave that there. So with this account of Yati Ramlal's life and medical training, we get a sense of this network of traditional medical systems that were operating in the late 19th century and early 20th century. We get to see the level of collaboration that defined the time. The central theme of Ramlal's Jivan Charitra is his interest in gathering remedies from as many sources as are available, which he then compiles into his treatise. He works with Jains of a number of sectarian affiliations, with Yatis from other Gachas, with lay Pandits, Brahmins, Sadhus, Muslim Hakims, and with royal officers. He doesn't shy away from any method of treatment, so long as it's effective. And I'd like to emphasize, his base of operation is very often a Jain temple or an upashraya. So with that, I'd like to contextualize his life and work as a Vaidya a bit more with some examples from my fieldwork. Which will hopefully help open up our understanding of how Jain monks and how Jain monasteries operated at the time. So for our first example, I spoke with Nand Kishore Sharma, a local historian and head of the Folk Culture Museum in Jaisalmer. And though we could only speak briefly, he told me about growing up in Jaisalmer, how there were some 20 or so Jain neighborhoods, and in each neighborhood, it had its own Jain temple, and in each temple sat a Yati or Yatis who would be consulted for medical or other services. Since then, the temples are still present, but the Gaddis have been removed, with the exception of two of the two Gaddis depicted here. One of which, this one's connected to the lineage of Sri Puja Jinchandra, is to the Rajvaidya, or the royal physician of the Jaisalmer king. Now, according to the attendants of the temples, these Yatis here specialize in ear problems and in eye problems, and the Tapagach Yati was apparently an accomplished tantric. In fact, the upashrayas were built with sections for herb gardens, usually at the side, where they could gather the necessary ingredients for their remedies. And as you can see, there are still some herbs being grown, although these very small gardens are mostly in disuse now. And there's a similar upasra I found, actually completely by accident, on a side street in Jodhpur, whose Yati, I was told, specialized in tooth and mouth problems, so a Yati dentist. A resident of the neighborhood told me that this Yati, too, was a powerful tantric. Now, with this, we can begin to imagine a different function, a different purpose for Jain monasteries, and that is of medical service. At the Bada Upashray in Bikaner, the center for the Sri Puja Jinchandra's lineage, I was given a tour of the Upashray, and I apologize for the picture quality here, but I was told that Yatis in this Upashray, with well, dozens more pillars than you can actually see from the photo, a different Yati would sit at the side of each pillar, and local residents could go to a particular Yati for medical advice, for astrology, education, and religious instruction. On the side here, there was a small hall where Yatis and their attendants would grind herbs for use as medicine. And the Upashray attendants have actually collected many of the possessions of the apparently dozens of Yatis that operated here. And among them, you can see additional equipment, pens and styli, mortars and pestles, and even, if you close up here, a double mortar and pestle. And they also collected astronomical tools, and here a doll's head, which I think I was told was used for some tantric ritual. Now, the streets surrounding the Bada Upashray were at one time filled with ashodalais and chemist shops, most of which are no longer extant. But just down the street, you can find an Ayurvedic store based on the old Lonkagach Upashray, which is still in function today. It's run by a descendant of one of the last Lonkagach Yati Vaidyas to take residence here. So inside, you can find the gadi of the Yati, a small library, and a functioning modern Ayurvedic shop where you can find Patanjali products and the like. And you can get consultations from the Yati descended Vaidya here. Now, this isn't the only place where you can find active Yati medical service activity. In Mumbai, at the Chintamani Parshvanath Darasar in Buleshwar, Sri Puja Jinchandra has authorized his gadi, as far as I'm aware, to two Yatis, Sushil Kumar and Yati Lalit, to practice mantric medical services. The two Yatis switch between Mumbai and Bikaner every 6 months. So I believe right now Sushil Kumar should be there again, if I'm not mistaken. And as he was telling me stories of Yati miracles, I witnessed Yati Sushil Kumar be approached by a number of clients, mostly mothers with their children or senior citizens. They would describe some ailment, and more often than not, he would ask them to bring 2 limes on which he would write with marker some symbol. And then he would use this baton here, right here. He would use this baton here, which is made of peacock feathers wrapped in red cloth, to wave in front of the afflicted person and mutter some mantras to himself and send them on their way. He told me that many Yatis would have 2 brooms like this, the regular white oga of the standard Śvetāmbar monk, and a red one like the one he had to perform mantra tantra. He also said one of his predecessors, a Yati, was an adept tantric and regularly performed midnight graveyard meditations. He was quite popular, and our interviews were regularly interrupted by his multiple clients. In Azimganj in Murshidabad, where Yati Ramlal is from, I met multiple residents who grew up around Yatis, and they reported that the main thing that they were known for was their miracles and their healing abilities. For a time, Yatis were the town's primary medical practitioners. I was given access to a diary belonging to the last Lonkagach Yati to live in Azimganj, who died about 5 years ago. In it, there are about 200 pages of instructions for mantras, yantras, and Ayurvedic recipes, including curing stomach pain, improving eyesight, and getting rid of bad dreams or the evil eye. Yatis were known especially for their special use, for their use of a special charm called a tabiz, which is a small metal capsule that's stuffed with a yantra in order to achieve some effect, usually the healing of illness or the protection from danger. And sure enough, in the Yati's diary, you find instructions on how to make a tabiz. So you can see from these examples that not only Yati Ramlal, but Yatis in general practice using a variety of medical and healing systems, from herbal medicines to charms to mantras and other practices. Now, with these examples in mind, I do want to emphasize that these are not just small, marginal monks who happen to engage in medical practices here or there in forgotten temples. In many cases, Jain Yati medical practitioners were able to attain quite high status. First, there's Muni Jimavijay, who joined a wandering Yati physician at a young age, but then subsequently joined the Stanakvasi sect, then the Murti Pujak Śvetāmbar sadhus, until he finally disrobed and pursued a life as a lay scholar. He became the director of the Gujarat Puratattva Mandir under the Gujarat Vidyapith, established by Mahatma Gandhi. He was invited by Hermann Jacobi to research in Germany, and when he returned to India, he became the first honorary director of the Rajasthan Oriental Research Institute. Next, we can look at Yati Udaychand, whose life, to my knowledge, has been completely unexamined. Yati Udaychand was from the Katargach Mandovra Shaka, and he became the Rajvaidya, or royal physician, of the Jodhpur king. For his work, he was given the village of Chanod as a Jagir. He acted as the president of the Jodhpur Maharaja's All India Ayurvedic Conference in 1939 and established the Sri Jildatsuri Ayurved Mahavidyalaya, Ayurvedic University. His predecessor, Rajvaidya Umeddatji, was also a royal physician. And there are a number of Jain Yati Rajvaidyas in the Rajput courts, from Jaisalmer to Bikaner to Udaipur and onward, whose lives and contributions remain completely unacknowledged. So as we conclude, I hope this presentation has shown some light on this somewhat forgotten aspect of Jain history. I hope that it has opened up our understanding of what a Jain monk can do, how Jain monks operated in practice historically, what services they could provide, and really how a Jain upashray, a Jain monastery, could and did operate. Yatis and Sri Pujas dominated North Indian Jainism for at least 300 years, and in many gachas, they were the only class of monks with which a layperson could interact. And in that time, they made incredible contributions to Jain literature, ritual culture, devotion, and as we have seen, medical service. Moving forward, I hope to continue to examine the lives and works of more Yatis, especially those that worked as Vaidyas. Just from the short account of the life and training of Yati Ramlal, we were able to get a glimpse of the network of indigenous medical systems and their practitioners in the early 20th century. Along with this network's response to the introduction of allopathic medicine, which makes for valuable contributions to the study of the study of the history of medicine and Jain contributions to medical practice. So with that, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Saurabh and Jainism for hosting my presentation. If I said anything inaccurate or offensive, I beg your forgiveness. And from here, I think we'll move on to questions. And if you want to contact me after this, you can contact me via my email or on Instagram. So once again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, for this wonderful talk. And indeed, we have been enlightened about the Yati tradition and the important historical role that it had played within the Jain community. And we have a few questions from the participants, and I request you to please answer them. The first is, can you please tell us if there were or there are any female Yatis? And also, was there any Sthanakwasi equivalent of Murti Pujak Yati?
Okay, yes, I'm going to switch back to my presentation because I've actually a particular question. The short answer is yes, there were Yatinis in the past. And if my presentation can load, or I guess I could just scroll down here. Yes, so here we have Yatini Maganshri. She was the last Yatini, which I know. Yeah, and so this lineage died out around the same time as the Yatis, although other sources say that Yatin lineages died out sooner. Within the groups of Yatis that maybe aren't connected with Sri Puja Chandrasuri's lineage, which have this kind of looser definition, there are one or two female ascetics who claim the term Yati, although I haven't been able to interact with them much. But there definitely were Yatinis. And in fact, there will be a Diksha ceremony soon where Yatinis will be initiated. So the lineage is going to be revived probably within the next couple of months. So that's pretty exciting. As for Stanakvasi equivalents, so prior to the movement that Stanakvasis and Terapanthis come out of are the writings of Lonka Shah. and who was a layperson, and he's most known, of course, for not believing in image worship. So let me exit out here. So towards the end of Lonkasha's life, the Lonka Gutch is established. And in the Lonka Gutch, Yatis eventually take over and proliferate. And they actually reintroduce image worship to the lineage of Lonkasha. So there's kind of from my understanding, this is not my area of expertise, but from my understanding, there's sort of a second reform movement. And from there, you get the samudais from which the Stanagvasi sect and the Terapanthi sect become formed out of. So there were kind of Stanagvasi Yatis, but not exactly. They were Longtagach Yatis. Any further questions?
Yes, of course. Thank you for answering that, Eric. And we have we have more questions. So, because some Yatis were close to local rulers, for example, Yati Vaidya Umed Dutt ji, who happens to be the royal physician of the Jodhpur Darbar. So, were they also instrumental in promoting Jain causes with local kings, such as maybe securing rights to construct Jain temples, or maybe securing pilgrim routes?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. As for the specific examples of Rajvaidyas that I know about, I haven't really been able to examine their lives in great detail, so I couldn't give any specifics. I know for a fact that Yati Udaichand, one of the ones that I mentioned at the end, he was extremely close to the Jodhpur king, the royal family. So he wasn't, this Rajvaidya title was not just a title. He actually he actually serviced the royal family and many of the ministers. So I have in my possession in digital form his Abhinandan Granth, where you have letters from different ministers thanking him for his service. So I assume that they probably use this leeway. Now, aside from that, I know that not only did specific Yati Vaidyas have connections, but the Shripujas as well were very well connected with local ruling families and with Rajput kings and so forth. Yeah, so they very often had connections, and the way that they would interact, that is the way that the Rajput kings would interact with the Jain community is by speaking directly to the Sri Puja. And I even showed very briefly a picture where you have one of the Sri Pujas being welcomed by the Bikaner king, the Bikaner Maharaj. So they definitely had connections, and they definitely used these connections to promote the Jain cause and secure rights and benefits for themselves, for the community.
Okay, and there is this one last question. Are there any medical practices which are peculiar to the Yatis, which are maybe not which are not found in among those who practice Ayurveda and
Right.
sort of medical? Yeah.
Right. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to really dive into these practices specifically, partially because these works are very often compendiums. So they're just collections of all the knowledge, all the knowledge that's out there. So you get yatis who are quoting, traditional sources like Sushruta and Charaka. So there's definitely a bunch of overlap. Is there a distinct Jain Ayurveda that they're using? I don't know. In the book of mantras that I found, there are like mantras that invoke Jain gods, like minor gods, and they use like the Jain Om symbol. But other than that, I cannot at this point in my research say that there was a distinct Jain Ayurveda or a distinct Yati Ayurveda. Yeah, so I hope that answers that.
Okay, thank you so much, Eric, for Okay, someone, yes, if you have questions, you can type it in the chat section.
Sure. So I'll read out Anshit's question, which is a great one. So it's, what would you define as the most distinctive differences between 17th, 18th century of their monastic conduct? So this is where it gets really fun, because so we have what are called maryadas, which are kind of they're the most localized rules that a monk has to follow. And it's really hard to get these maryadas because they're usually just oral tradition. If they are written down, it's just like in a monk's notebook. But we do have some from some of the earliest Tapagach Sri Pujas. And when I showed them to Tapagach Samvegis in Mumbai, and they had read them. I mean, I'm not like claiming I showed them something crazy new. They said that some of the monks nowadays don't even follow the rules that these yatis were following back then. And they specifically pointed to a particular Shri Puja, which Acharya Atmaram, this great Tapagach reformer, said was, this horribly lax, horribly shitil Shri Puja, who destroyed the Jain Dharma, destroyed the Jain Shasan. And then you look at the rules that he's giving his monks, and current monks were saying some monks today don't follow these rules. And I will also say that there are monks in all gachas, Samvegi monks, who practice astrology and who practice palmistry and charm making and other things like this. So there's definitely a lot of overlap. A lot of this actually has to do with questions of lineage. And when it comes to conduct, it gets really tricky and it gets really fun though. Any remaining questions?
Yeah, I hope that answer all the questions for today. And for anyone having any other queries other than this, can write to Eric. I think he has already shared his mail ID, and I'll also upload it on Instagram for your reference. So with this, I would now like to invite Dipti for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Saurabh. It has been a great session. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Eric for giving us your precious time and such a wonderful and insightful lecture. Thank you for bringing forward this relatively less known and certainly very less explored aspect of Jain monastic tradition and Upadhyay Ramlalji. We are sure this talk will be instrumental not just in throwing light on the Yati tradition, but also on clearing several misconceptions surrounding them. I'm sure all of us are very delighted after this lecture. This session wouldn't have been complete without our participants. So thank you all for joining us today. And last but not the least, I would like to appreciate the team for taking the efforts and making this happen. I hope we will meet again soon in our next sessions.
Likewise. Thanks again.
Thanks, Eric.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much. Thank you
Dipti.
so much.
Thanks, Saurabh.